Hi everyone, I hope you are okay. My name is Brittany Ruiz and I'm going to talk about Descent into Madness, the New Mexico State prison riot. One type of social deviance, according to sociologists, is crime. If deviance is the violation of a social norm, then a crime is the violation of social norms that had been made into law. Mark Colvin. The United States has a high proportion of its population in prison compared to other countries, and many prisons are overcrowded and afflict with problems of violence and sexual assault. Sociologists have long studied the social structure and subculture of prisons. Mark Colvin was hired by the New Mexico Attorney General Office to help with the investigation into the events and causes of the 1980 riot at the Penitentiary of New Mexico. In the excerpt that follows, Mark Colvin provides important insight into the history and social structure of the prison and how the breakdown in that social structure enabled violence and disorganization to occur. The riot at the Penitentiary of New Mexico on January 2nd and 3rd, 1980 is without comparison for its violence, destruction, and disorganization the most horrific prison riot in history. During the 36 hours of the riot, 33 of 1,157 inmates were killed by other inmates. Many of the victims were tortured and mutilated. A 34th inmate died several months later from injuries he received during the riot. As many as 200 inmates were severely injured from beatings, stabbings, and rapes. Many more suffered less serious injuries. In addition, scores of inmates were treated for overdoses of drugs taken from the prison's pharmacy during the riot. The more inmates did not die can be attributed to the dedicated work of medical personnel and emergency crews who treat the injured and transport them to local hospitals. 7 of the 12 correctional officers who were taken hostage were beaten, stabbed, or sodomized. None of the hostages were killed. Some of the ward hostages were protected by a small group of inmates during the riot. A few hostages were even assisted in leaving the prison during the riot by sympathetic inmates. The Penitentiary of New Mexico was not always a violent and disorganized prison. In fact, on July 14, 1976, inmates at this prison staged a well-organized and peaceful protest to the new administration that started to dismantling prison programs and reducing inmate privilege. The level of participation in this 1976 strike demonstrated a high degree of solidarity and cooperation amongst inmates. There was no violence among inmates during this event. The strike was broken by the staff with violence. Leaders of this strike were identified and segregated or transferred out of stage. The prison staff, after this point, began to rely increasingly on coercion to maintain control of the institution. The hall, where prisoners used to be beaten by ward, which had been closed since 1968, was reopened and used frequently. The number of the inmates in disciplinary segregation grew substantially, from less than 5% of the inmate population before June 1976 to as much as 25% of the inmate population after June 1976. As the middle-level administrator gained dominance after 1978, a new coerciveness system emerged. This system had its role in the aftermath of June 1976 inmate strike when staff members attempted to identify the strike leaders. Inmates were threatened with disciplinary lockup if they did not identify strike participants and leaders. By 1978, this tactic had become a key aspect of the institution's inmate control system. Since inmates were not forthcoming with voluntary information, many members of this correctional staff began soliciting information through threat and promise. Inmates were promised early parole consideration, protection, and transfer to minimum security institutions. They were also threatened with being locked up in disciplinary segregation or, in other cases, were refused protective custody if they did not inform. Another coercive tactic was to intimidate an inmate by threatening to hang a snitch jacket on him. These tactics, which involved the threat of labeling an inmate a snitch or an informant, was used to solicit information, gain control over an inmate, and in some instances, retaliate against an inmate. This come to be known as the snitch game. The snitch game had the effect of breaking apart any sense of inmate solidarity. Some inmates labeled as snitches might not have been informants at all. Whether an inmate had been an informant or not, the level of snitch could have deadly consequences, a fact that was used to intimidate inmates and create friction among prisoners. From 1969 through July 1976, there were no killings at the Penitentiary of New Mexico. No prison officers were attacked, and inmate fights and sexual assaults were rare. Months later the new army took over. 6 inmates were killed by another inmate. Several attacks on prison officers occurred, and fighting among inmates became routine. Sexual assault by the late 1970s had become so routine that there was at least one reported case a day and 10 to 15 more non-reported cases daily. This inconsistency by the prison staff was often interpreted by inmates as evident harassment. In some cases, correctional officers, including lieutenants and captains, were caught up in a game of mutual harassment with inmates. The minority of prison officers who engaged in this activity poisoned relationship between the staff and inmate and create enormous hostility. The administration tactics for breaking up inmate solidarity led to a series of changes within the inmate society that generate violence and disorder. By 1978, the fear of being assaulted, especially of being sexually attacked, had become a prevalent feature of inmate life, especially for younger inmates. All of this may have fed at the riot of the Penitentiary of New Mexico on February 3, 1980. Inmate leaders, to the extent that there were any, were unable to organize inmate or to stop the inmate-on-inmate violence. All inmates were killed by another inmate. The disorganization of the riot and the brutality of many of these killings are what distinguish the New Mexico State prison riot. There were a few of us in here that tried to freeze that inmate-to-inmate violence because it was wrong. 3 hours after the riot started, he was not stopping, but there were a few of us that were saying, if you want to burn it down, or whatever you want. But quit killing people. Don't turn this against ourselves. If you want to fight someone, fight the man, fight the administration, said one inmate to Mark Colvin when they were being interrogated. But his and the other inmates' efforts to turn the riot into a protest were ineffective. Correctional officers and many more inmates would have died in the riot had it not been for the heroic efforts of some prisoners who risked their life to save others from harm. Indeed, this prison riot brought out not only the evil potential of human beings, but also the potential for virtue. We are quick to condemn the evil act and use this as an excuse to label all prisoners as animals. But to do so is to ignore the act of kindness and courage displayed by many inmates, to ignore the fact that the overwhelming majority of inmates only wanted to escape the chaos, the violence, and the fear, and to ignore the essential humanity of the great majority of people that are locked up in prisons. Now I'm going to display my three questions about the topic. Thank you all for your attention.